The north was colder than usual that year. Snow came early, and with it whispers of betrayal. But Robb Stark, the young king in the north, stood tall. He had already defeated several Lannister armies. Lords sang his praises. Men knelt before him. But power, he knew, came with fear. And fear? That was something Robb felt more and more every night. He trusted many, but not all. One man, however, stood silent and strong through every battle, Lord Roose Bolton of the Dreadfort. He was strange, cold, spoke with slow words like he was measuring every sentence. But he followed Robb's orders. He won battles without seeking fame. And most of all, he kept his soldiers in line, even his brutal, bastard son Ramsay, who stayed far away in the Dreadfort. One night, as Robb sat in his war tent with Lady Talisa, his new queen, Catelyn entered looking tired. "You must not trust Bolton," she said sharply. "He gives me chills. He watches too closely and speaks too little." Robb looked at her, thinking deeply. "But he's done nothing wrong. He's loyal." "Not all snakes hiss," Catelyn said, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Some just wait." But Robb was tired. Tired of doubt. Tired of people turning their backs on him. The Karstarks had betrayed him. Half the Riverlands were unsure. He needed strength, and Roose Bolton was strong. That night he called Roose to his tent. "I want you to stand as my champion, Lord Bolton," Robb said, pouring him a cup of wine. Roose blinked, slow and calm. "Your Grace, you honor me." "But why me?" "Because you don't beg for power," Robb said. "And that makes you the one I can trust with it." Roose bowed his head. "Then I will fight and die in your name." Robb smiled. He thought he had made the right choice. But as Roose left the tent, the cold in the air grew heavier, as if the night itself held its breath. In the days that followed, Roose was given more power. He commanded whole armies in Robb's name. Some lords complained, saying he was too cruel, that he flayed prisoners alive, that his men were more dogs than soldiers. But Robb needed victories, not kindness. So he turned his eyes away. Talisa noticed it too. "He scares me," she told Robb one night. "When he looks at me, it's like I'm not even a person to him. Just a thing." Robb kissed her hand gently. "He fights for us. That's all I care about right now." But deep down, Robb started to feel uneasy too. He saw Roose giving orders without asking permission. He heard whispers that Ramsay was gathering men in the Dreadfort. He even caught Roose speaking alone with Frey riders near the camp. Though they claimed it was nothing, still he stayed silent. He had made his choice, and a king couldn't afford to show doubt in his own champion. One evening, a raven came from Winterfell. It was burned and torn, but the words were clear. "Ramsay Bolton has taken Winterfell. The Greyjoys are gone, but so are your brothers." Robb dropped the letter. "Bran and Rickon, gone, dead." He stormed into Rose's tent. "Your son has taken my home. My brothers—" Roose looked at him with blank eyes. "Ramsay acts on his own. I did not order this, but I will bring him under control. If you allow me to." Robb's hands shook. His heart said, "Hang him now." But his mind whispered, "You need him more than ever." He made his decision. "You will lead the march to take Winterfell back," Robb said. "Bring Ramsay to me, alive. I want to look him in the eyes before I end him." Roose nodded slowly. "As you wish, Your Grace." But as he turned away, a small, cruel smile played on the edge of his lips. The snow fell harder as Roose Bolton prepared his march north to Winterfell. The cold didn't bother him. It was the silence that he loved. In silence, men thought less, questioned less. And when they stopped thinking, it was easier to take everything from them. Robb Stark had just handed him the North in a silver bowl. The king in the North was too young, too proud, too in love. That foreign wife of his had turned his head soft, and Roose had waited patiently through every battle, every council, every night of forced loyalty. Now it was time to move. Before riding out, Roose sent a raven, not to the Dreadfort, not to Ramsay, but to the twins. Walder Frey would want a seat at the table. And Roose? He didn't care who sat beside him, as long as the wolf pup was finally off the throne. Back in camp, Robb grew restless. He wanted to ride with Roose, but his mother and his wife begged him to stay. "You've trusted him this far," Talisa said, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Let him prove himself." Robb nodded, but his heart twisted. The letter about Winterfell haunted him. If his brothers were dead, then what was left to fight for? The crown? The title? None of it meant anything without family. Roose moved quickly, taking his best men, the quiet, cruel ones, the ones who obeyed without question. As they marched toward the Dreadfort first, before Winterfell, people wondered. Rumors spread like frostbite, and slow, deadly, and often unnoticed until it was too late. Some of the northern bannermen started whispering behind Robb's back, "Why give so much power to a Bolton? He flays men alive, and we're trusting him to save the Stark bloodline?" But Robb didn't listen. He had already made his choice, and choices once made carry weight. He couldn't afford to look weak, not again. At the Dreadfort, Roose reunited with his bastard. Ramsay had taken Winterfell, true, and he had burned it. He had hunted down the Stark boys like rabbits in the snow. But he couldn't prove they were dead, because they weren't. Bran and Rickon had escaped, hidden by loyal men who still believed the wolves would return. Roose wasn't concerned with truth. He was concerned with image. "The boys are dead," Roose said coldly, standing before a long table covered in maps and meat. "As far as Robb knows, you've done your part." Ramsay grinned, his teeth yellow and sharp like a dog's. "And now?" he asked. "Now," Roose said, slicing a piece of meat slowly, "we prepare for the trap." Frey has agreed. "Robb will be dealt with at the Twins, but if he survives, we will deal with him here." Ramsay leaned back, laughing. "The king in the north trusted you," he said mockingly. "He gave you his banner, his armies." Roose looked up. "And when a man gives you everything," he said, "you can finally take what he doesn't offer, his life." Meanwhile, Robb received another letter. This one bore the Frey seal. Lord Walder Frey had agreed to forgive the insult. Robb marrying Talisa instead of one of his daughters, and would allow Edmure Tully to wed one of the Frey girls instead, sealing the alliance once more. Catelyn was wary. Walder Frey forgives nothing. Robb paced the tent, hands behind his back. If he wanted revenge, he had every chance. But now we have peace. Roose will take Winterfell. The Freys will be family. The war could finally end. Talisa looked up from her needlework. "And what comes after peace?" Robb smiled faintly. "We go home, to Winterfell, to rebuild." But Talisa noticed something he didn't. In every plan he spoke, Robb said "we," but in the north he had sent Rose. To the Twins, he would go alone. He was splitting himself, not just his army, but his trust, giving pieces of himself to men who sharpened their knives when he turned his back. As Rose approached Winterfell, his soldiers saw the ruins. The walls were black with fire. The smell of ash and blood still hung in the air. Ramsay had painted horror across every inch of the castle. Flayed bodies, wolf banners burned. The Stark sigil torn apart. Rose didn't flinch. "Let it stand," he said. "But my lord, if Robb sees this—" "He won't," Rose said, his voice low. "Because Robb Stark will never make it back. He sent another raven to the Twins. It is done. The north is yours when the wolf falls. Begin." And far away in a quiet, snow-covered camp, Robb Stark sat with his queen, dreaming of peace, of family, of home. He never saw the knives being sharpened in the shadows. The road to the Twins was colder than death. Robb Stark rode at the head of his army, his direwolf Grey Wind padding silently beside him, always alert, always watching. The closer they got to Walder Frey's stronghold, the heavier the air became. Like the trees themselves, whispered warnings too quiet for human ears. Catelyn rode behind, her face pale with worry. She had not smiled in days. And Talisa tried her best to stay calm, but she felt it in her bones. Something was wrong. Not just the cold, not just the frostbite in the air, but the way the world seemed to hold its breath. But Robb, the young king in the north, wore a brave face. He had to. He couldn't show fear now. He had made promises to his mother, to his queen, to the lords who followed him. Peace was finally in reach. The war, they believed, was ending. They were wrong. Inside the walls of the Twins, Walder Frey sat on his crooked chair, chewing a piece of meat with his mouth open. His daughters stood lined up like ghosts, faces blank, waiting to be married off like livestock. Roose Bolton stood beside him. "Everything is prepared," Rose said quietly. Frey spat a bone onto the floor. "About time. Thought I'd die of old age before seeing that wolf pup beg for forgiveness." Rose turned his eyes toward the door. "He won't beg. He thinks this is a celebration." Walder grinned, half his teeth missing. "Even better." Rose didn't smile back. He didn't believe in joy, only in silence and betrayal. The castle hall had been decorated in banners. Frey colors, Tully colors, even a few Stark ones, placed just carefully enough to make Robb feel welcome, and just false enough to hide the knives beneath the smiles. When Robb arrived, he noticed the way the guards stood, too stiff, too quiet. He noticed how Rose wasn't there to greet him, even though he'd been sent north. "Where's Lord Bolton?" He asked one of the Frey men. "Inside," the guard answered. "Helping with the wedding preparations." Catelyn's face darkened. "He was supposed to be in Winterfell." Talisa touched Robb's hand. "Maybe he returned. Maybe Winterfell is already taken back." But Robb's chest tightened. It didn't feel right. Still, he nodded. "Let's not insult the Freys. We've come for peace." They entered the great hall. Music played. Loud, cheerful, too cheerful. Frey daughters danced with drunk bannermen. Walder Frey welcomed them with a wide grin and open arms. Edmure Tully, already red-faced with wine, met his bride, a surprisingly fair girl who smiled nervously. Roose Bolton stood at the back, wine in hand, face unreadable. He locked eyes with Robb and blinked slowly. Once Robb raised a hand in silent greeting. Roose didn't move, and Catelyn noticed it then, noticed how Roose's hand never left his side, how his fingers tapped gently against the hilt of a dagger. As the night grew louder, Robb leaned toward Talisa, smiling softly. "Maybe we were wrong," he whispered. "Maybe the old man truly wants peace." Talisa smiled back. "Then maybe we'll have a future." And in that moment, with her hand resting on her belly, she was ready to tell him she was pregnant. But she never got the chance, because then the music stopped. Not all at once. Just slowly, like a dying breath. The drums faded. The flute broke into a sharp, wrong note. The hall grew quiet. Too quiet. Catelyn stood. She looked at Roose. His eyes were already on her. She stepped toward him, reaching behind for the knife at her waist. "What is this?" Robb began, but then the first arrow flew. It struck Grey Wind in the side. The direwolf howled in pain and crashed into the hall doors as more arrows followed. Frey men rose from their seats, pulling swords from behind chairs, axes from beneath tables. Screams echoed. Talisa turned, panicked, and was stabbed in the belly. Once, twice, over and over. She collapsed without a sound. Robb yelled her name and charged forward, but a spear pinned his leg to the wooden floor. Blood poured down his thigh as he reached for her. Catelyn grabbed Roose by the sleeve, knife pressed to his neck. "Call it off," she screamed. "Call it off, or I'll kill you right now." Roose didn't blink. He leaned in close, whispered in her ear, "The Lannisters send their regards," and then he stabbed her son right through the heart. Robb gasped, not in pain, but in disbelief. He looked at his mother, at Talisa, at the soldiers dying around him. Then he fell. The hall went still. Catelyn screamed, a sound so sharp and raw it didn't sound human. Then someone slit her throat from behind. Roose stood among the bodies, calm as the cold outside. The wolf was dead, and the north was his. The sun never rose over the twins the next morning. The sky was grey, heavy with clouds that felt almost angry. Snowflakes drifted down, landing softly on dead men's armor, turning blood into frozen stains on cold steel. The Red Wedding was over, but the war was not. Far from the slaughtered hall, a handful of Stark loyalists managed to escape the chaos. They rode hard through the snow, pushing their horses to the edge of death. Among them was Mage Mormont, her armor dented, blood on her shoulder. Beside her rode Greatjon Umber, wounded but furious, his face twisted with rage. "We ride north," Mage shouted over the cold wind. "No," the Greatjon growled, gripping his axe tighter. "We ride to the Dreadfort, We take the Bolton bastard's skin and hang it from his own walls. Maze shook her head sharply. We don't know how strong they are. If we rush in, we die like the rest. The Great John cursed loud enough to scare the crows. What of the young wolf? He asked, voice quieter now. Mage didn't answer. There was no king in the north anymore, but they would not let the north fall without fire. We gather what we can, she finally said. The north remembers, and we will show those flares that wolves bite hardest in winter. They turned their horses east, disappearing into the growing storm. In King's Landing, news travelled faster than ravens, servants whispered. Lord smirked. And in the throne room, Tywin Lannister sat calmly, sipping wine, as if he hadn't just destroyed an entire kingdom overnight. Joffrey laughed wildly as the report was read. So the wolf pup is dead, he shouted. I want his head sent here. I want to feed it to my hounds. Tywin didn't look amused. Let the dead rest, your grace. The north belongs to House Bolton now, as we decided, Joffrey pouted. But I want them to see. Tywin stood. His voice was smooth, dangerous. The king does not need to show off. The king simply needs to win. Joffrey opened his mouth to argue, but one cold look from his grandfather shut him up. Cersei watched silently, glancing at the Iron Throne. For the first time, she realized the truth. Joffrey wore the crown. But Tywin ruled the realm. Far away in the shadows, Varys listened and worried. For winter was coming, and the north remembers. Roose Bolton rode into Winterfell like he owned the world, because now he actually did. The dreadful banners were raised high, the red-flayed man waving where the direwolf once stood proud. Winterfell's stones were cracked, black with ash. The courtyard smelled of burned wood and old blood. Ramsay rushed to greet his father, smiling too wide. You've done it, Ramsay said. The Starks are finished. Roose stepped down from his horse and looked around with cold disappointment. Winterfell was supposed to be taken, he said quietly. Not destroyed, Ramsay shrugged. Ashes are easier to control. Rose's eyes hardened. If you want to keep what we have gained, you must learn that fear is useful, but respect is powerful. Ramsay tilted his head. Respect? He said the word like it tasted bitter. I'll make them respect us. Just give me the north. Rose leaned in close. You may have your games, your hunting, your skinning. His voice darkened. But the north is mine. Ramsay smiled wider. Too wide, as you say, father. But behind the smile was a promise soaked in future blood. Deep in the crypts of Winterfell, a group of hidden Stark loyalists watched silently from the shadows, listening. Among them was Osha, clutching Rickon Stark close. The boy trembled, his eyes wide with fear. Where's Bran? Rickon whispered. Osha didn't answer. She couldn't. All she could do was hold him tight. We'll stay hidden, she murmured. We'll wait. Someone loyal will come. Rickon wiped a tear away with his sleeve. Robb promised he would keep us safe. Osha's voice cracked. He tried, little wolf. He tried. Up above, Roose walked across the broken stones of Winterfell. He believed he had won. He believed the Starks were gone. He didn't know two young wolves, and a powerful secret, still lived beneath his feet. Night fell hard. Roose sat alone in the Lord's chamber. He placed his hand on the cold stone table and allowed himself. Something rare, take a small smile. The north is quiet, he whispered, but the wind outside howled. Louder, as if the very land itself laughed at the idea, for the north belonged to no flayed man. Not truly, not ever. It belonged to the wolves, and wolves do not die quietly. Snow piled up along Winterfell's ruined walls, burying old blood, covering cracked stone. But nothing could cover the stench of betrayal that clung to the air like smoke. Inside the great hall, Ramsay Bolton feasted like a king, though he wasn't one. He chewed with his mouth open, meat juices dripping from his chin as he laughed at his own joke. Around him sat his personal dogs, men just as twisted, just as cruel. They cheered as he spoke of hunts, of flayed men who cried for mercy, of noble daughters he'd broken and left in tears. Roose Bolton sat at the far end of the table, quiet, watching, not out of approval. out of calculation. Ramsay's madness was useful. For now, but even tools break if used too long. My lords, Roose said, setting down his wine. The room quieted instantly. We have taken the north, yes, but holding it will be harder, Ramsay scoffed. Let them rise. I'll skin every last one. Roose's eyes narrowed. You will not without cause. Fear spreads fast, but too much fear breeds rebellion. I want control, not chaos. Ramsay leaned back, smiling, but behind the grin was tension. Like a dog waiting to bite the hand that feeds it. Far to the south, in the golden prison of King's Landing, Sansa Stark sat alone in her chambers. She had heard the rumors, Robb dead, her mother dead, her family slaughtered. She had no tears left, just silence. Tyrion, her unwanted husband, approached gently. I'm sorry, he said softly. She didn't respond. Just stared out the window at the sea, dark and endless. They say Roose Bolton was the one who stabbed him, Tyrion continued. That the Frys invited them into their hall, only to butcher them under their roof. No banners, no warning. Sansa's lips tightened. That's not war, she whispered. That's murder. Tyrion sat beside her, awkward in his sympathy. I know. They were my family. I know, he said again. She finally looked at him, eyes filled not with tears, but with cold resolve. Then they will pay. Tyrion said nothing more, but in his heart he feared the day that girl became a woman, forged in fire and blood. She had learned too much about pain. Now she was learning patience. Beyond the wall, Jon Snow trained recruits, but his heart wasn't in it. The cold was colder, the wind more cruel, and the dream kept coming. He stood in Winterfell, but it was wrong. The snow was red, not white. Wolves howled from broken towers. He heard Bran's voice echoing from the shadows, whispering, "They're not all dead." Jon, not all of us. He woke with sweat on his brow, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sam watched him from across the room. Another dream? Jon nodded. I think something's coming. Something worse than White Walkers. Jon looked toward the south. Something colder than them, he said. A north ruled by flayed men. He didn't know why, but in his bones he felt it. Winterfell had fallen, but the war for the north had just begun. In the shadows of the north, fires began to spark. Mage Mormont rode from Bear Island, gathering bannermen still loyal to the Starks. She visited the Glovers, the Reeds, the Serwyns. Many were afraid. Some were already kneeling to Bolton banners. But some remembered the old vows. The North remembers, she told them, and those words, whispered in cold halls, muttered by old soldiers passed from mother to child, began to breathe life again. In the hills of Deepwood Motte, a horn blew at midnight. In White Harbour, Lord Wyman Manderley closed his doors to all Frey envoys and began baking pies with strange ingredients. In the shadows of the Dreadfort, a woman with no name sharpened her knives and smiled. The North, though silent, was not dead. It was watching, and it was angry. Back in Winterfell, Rhodes received a raven from White Harbour. He read it twice. Problems? Ramsay asked, smirking. Rose folded the letter. The Manderleys claim loyalty, but do nothing. And we hear nothing from the Umbers. We must act before their silence turns to swords. Ramsay stood. Let me ride. Let me remind them what a flayed lord looks like. Rose considered it. No, he said finally. They expect you. I will send someone else. Ramsay's smile faded. You don't trust me. Rose looked him in the eye. I know you. And then he turned away, because even the coldest man in the North knew. One day, the beast he raised might bite back, but for now, Rose held the leash, and he would use it to choke every last breath from what remained of House Stark. Winterfell looked more like a forgotten grave than a home. Walls cracked, banners torn, the ancient courtyard now ruled by men who laughed at the old gods. But on the far side of the ruins, hidden beneath the stones, two small wolves still breathed. Osha peeked out through a gap in the rocks. She watched Ramsay's men drag two terrified farmers into the yard, accusing them of hiding Stark loyalists. The men begged for mercy, which only made Ramsay smile wider. Osha pulled Rickon back into the shadows before he could scream. "You told me Robb would save us," he whispered angrily, tears forming in his eyes. Osha held his shoulders tight. "The Boltons think they've won. Wolves don't fight in open fields. We hunt from the dark." Rickon sniffed and nodded, wiping his face. "Like father did." "Yes," Osha whispered. "Like your father." And in the dark crypts below, beneath the stone statues of dead kings, an old power waited and listened. Winter was waking. At the wall, Jon Snow could barely sleep. Every night the same dream returned, Bran calling to him, the weirwood screaming, Winterfell burning. He stood alone by the fire when Sam approached with a scroll in shaking hands. "A raven came from the south," Sam said. "It's news about the Red Wedding." Jon closed his eyes. "Say it," Sam swallowed hard. "Robb is dead, Jon." The world seemed to stop. Jon stared into the flames until tears blurred his vision. He wanted to scream, to ride south and spill Bolton blood, to tear the twin stone from stone. But instead, he said only one thing: Bran and Rickon. "No word," Sam whispered. "Some say the Boltons killed them. Others say the Greyjoys," Jon nodded slowly. "If they were dead, something tells me I'd feel it." He clenched his jaw. "My brothers live." Sam placed a hand on his shoulder. "The Watch is your family now. That's what we swore." Jon didn't look away from the fire. "My family has always been the ones who needed saving." And for the first time, he truly hated the Cloaky War. Back in Winterfell, Ramsay finished his fun and walked inside, humming a cheerful tune that made his guards uncomfortable. Roose was waiting for him near the great hearth, reading reports from their spies. "You enjoy too much noise," Roose said. Ramsay laughed. "Noise means fear," Roose shook his head. "Noise means rebellion. And we are surrounded by wolves." Ramsay leaned closer, voice a low hiss. "Then let us put the wolves down." Roose looked at him, long, cold measuring. "You are not my heir," he said, slow as ice forming on a blade. "Not until I say so. Prove yourself useful." He stepped closer, whispering so only Ramsay could hear. "And then, perhaps, I will give you my name." Ramsay froze. His father's name, Bolton. He swallowed hard, nodding. "What must I do?" Rose handed him a sealed letter. "Well-written lies are better than steel. Take this to the Umbers. Make them kneel." Quietly, Ramsay grinned again, but now with purpose. "I'll bring you their loyalty," he promised. "No," Rose corrected. "Bring me their silence." Far away in King's Landing, Sansa Stark stared at the city below. The bells rang in celebration of Lannister victory. As if joy could erase murder, she turned when she heard the door open. It was Shae, her handmaiden, and the only friend she had left. "You heard?" Shae asked softly. Sansa nodded. "They killed my mother. They killed Robb. They killed my family in the dark like cowards." Shae stepped closer. "Then don't give up. Stay alive, survive, one day." "One day, I'll go home," Sansa whispered, gripping the balcony rail. "One day they will kneel before House Stark again." She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But a spark had been lit inside her. Not fear, not grief, revenge. As she looked to the north, a raven flew overhead, dark wings beating against a darker sky. The message it carried. The north remembers. Night fell on Winterfell again. Roose stood atop the battlements, staring into the thickening snowstorm. A soldier approached, trembling. "My lord." "The northern villagers. They aren't answering ravens. Not one." Roose didn't look away from the dark horizon. "They will kneel," he said calmly. "And if they don't—" Roose lowered his voice. "Then we make an example so fierce that even the dead in the crypts will bow before us." But from deep in those crypts, a faint, distant howl answered. It wasn't grey wind. It wasn't ghost. It was the north itself, and it wasn't bowing. Ramsay Bolton rode hard through the snow with a dozen men behind him, each one holding torches that flickered like dying stars in the freezing wind. He was excited, truly excited, because he believed this mission would prove his worth. He would return to Winterfell, not as Ramsay Snow, the bastard son, but as Ramsay Bolton, true heir of the North. The thought made him grin like a wolf who had just tasted blood. Ahead of them lay Last Hearth, the seat of House Umber, loyal to the Starks for 1,000 years. Hard men, proud men. Ramsay could hardly wait to break them. They dismounted at the gates. Ramsay knocked with the pommel of his sword. A deep voice answered from within, "Go away. Winterfell is cursed." "We bow to no flayed lord," Ramsay laughed. "I'm not asking for your bow." He motioned, and his men rammed the gate. Wood shattered, snow flew, and the hunt began. Inside, the Great John's nephew, Small John Umber, stood firm. He swung his great axe and cut down 3 Bolton men in seconds, roaring like a bear awoken from sleep. "You think you own the North?" he yelled. Ramsay stepped forward, amused. "I don't own the North," he said quietly. Then he stabbed a fallen man again, slowly, painfully, just to hear his screams. "I enjoy it," Small John charged. Ramsay dodged. They clashed, axe against dagger, sparks flying. Small John overpowered him and slammed him against a pillar. "I'll send your head to the wall," he shouted. But Ramsay had already signaled. A crossbow bolt struck Small John's shoulder from behind. He fell to his knees, breath short. Ramsay crouched before him, smiling wide. "You should have kneeled." He slit Small John's throat in one clean motion. Blood sprayed across the snow, red on white. Ramsay wiped his blade, whispering to himself, "Father will be proud." But he had no idea. Someone had been watching, deep in the shadows of the hall. A hooded figure with a wolf-carved dagger slipped away without a sound. The first ember of stark revenge had just been lit. At the wall, Jon Snow stood atop the battlements, staring into the endless white beyond. Ghost paced nervously beside him, fur bristled. The direwolf sensed something Jon did not, or maybe Jon sensed it too, but refused to believe it. Dolorous Ed approached him. "There's a rider coming from the north, alone." Jon's heart dropped. "A wildling?" "No," Ed replied. "He rides like a Northman." Jon gripped the hilt of Longclaw and descended the steps. The gate opened with a long groan. A rider slumped forward on a tired horse, half frozen, bleeding badly. His cloak was soaked in red, but the sigil on his armor was unmistakable. Umber. Jon rushed to catch him before he fell. The man gasped for air. "Bolton, burning villages, killing those loyal to Starks. They're hunting the north." Jon's jaw clenched. "Did you see any Stark boys?" "Bran Rickon?" The dying man nodded faintly. "Rickon. Alive in Winterfell's shadows. Protected by... His voice faded. His eyes stared blankly at the sky. Jon closed them gently. Ghost growled up toward the storm clouds. Jon whispered only one word. "Rickon." Duty pulled him north. Oaths pulled him south, but blood pulled hardest of all. King's Landing, Sansa Stark's chamber. Her tears had dried days ago. She didn't wear sadness anymore. She wore silence like armor. Tyrion entered slowly. "I have news," he said. "Something you must hear." She turned but didn't speak. "It's about your youngest brother, Rickon. There are rumors he might be alive." Sansa's heart stopped. "Alive?" Her voice cracked for the first time in days. "Where?" "Hidden somewhere in the north," Tyrion answered. "But if Ramsay Bolton finds him first, he won't." Sansa cut him off, eyes blazing. "I'll get him back, somehow." Tyrion stared at her, really stared, and realized the girl who once prayed to princes and dreamed of songs was gone. What stood before him was a wolf, and wolves. Once awakened are dangerous. Winterfell, Roose Bolton's chamber, a raven arrived. Sealed with the Bolton flayed man, Roose opened it, his eyes. Scanned the page. A small smile crept onto his face. "Ramsay has succeeded," he said calmly. But then he noticed the second. Line yet written hastily. "A survivor fled, heading north." Rose's smile faded. "A survivor," he whispered. "Which means a witness." He looked to the window. Snow swirled like ghosts in the wind. "We must find him," Roose murmured, "before he finds someone who remembers what wolves truly are." Outside, the battered walls of Winterfell groaned beneath the weight of ice. Inside the crypts below, a raven landed silently beside a Stark statue. 3 words were tied to its leg. The north remembers a cold that had nothing to do with winter crept into the stones, because the dead of Winterfell were listening, and the living were ready to rise. Snow fell thicker than ever over Winterfell. The skies were grey, the winds hollow. The castle stood like a dying beast, its bones cold, its heart still. Roose Bolton sat in the Lord's chair, reading reports by candlelight. The ink smudged from the damp air. Last hearth burned. The Umbers won't answer. The Manderleys send no men. No food, no coin, only silence. He tapped the page once, twice. A message in that silence. The kind of message he understood well. The North was not kneeling. Ramsay burst through the doors, boots wet, cloak soaked with blood and melted snow. Umbers are dead, he said with a grin. I fed their Meister to his own dogs. Rose didn't flinch. You let one of them escape. Ramsay rolled his eyes. One starving whelp. Let him crawl. No one will believe him. Rose stood, slow, quiet, like a blade being drawn from a sheath. One mouth is enough to start a war. Especially in the north. Ramsay's grin slipped. Then I'll cut every tongue. Roose stepped close, voice low and cold. You think flaying brings loyalty, but fear without respect breeds rebellion. Ramsay didn't like being corrected, not by his father, not by anyone. His fingers twitched near his blade. Rose saw it, and still turned his back. You have until the first full moon, Rose said. Find the boy. Kill whoever harbors him. End this. Or I take back what I gave you. Ramsay's hand dropped. His smile was gone. The bastard in him boiled just beneath the skin. Beyond the woods, Rickon Stark crouched beside a small fire, hidden beneath fallen trees and thick snow. The man who had saved him, the hooded one from last hearth, sat across from him, silent, face half covered in furs. But the eyes, they were northern. You fought with my brother, Rickon whispered. The man nodded. At the Whispering Wood, at the crag, at the twins, until the end. Why save me? Rickon asked. The man leaned forward, placing a carved wooden wolf into Rickon's palm. Because a Stark must always remain in Winterfell. The North needs something to believe in again. Rickon looked down at the carving. But I'm just a boy. You're a Stark, the man said. And they burned your name from the banners. It's time to stitch it back. A howl rose in the distance, long, low, and angry. Rickon stood. It's time to go home. At Castle Black, Jon Snow sat with his sword across his lap. Ghost paced restlessly. Every raven that came from the north brought worse news. Villages burned. Families flayed. Starks hunted like deer. He couldn't take it anymore. You swore a vow, Sam said again. The Watch needs you. Jon stood, voice firm. And the north needs me more. You'll lose everything, Sam said. Rank, home, honor. Jon looked toward the north. They lost their king, their brothers, their hope. I can lose a cloak. He left Ghost in Sam's care, and rode out that same night with only his blade, his name, and a fury that hadn't cooled since the Red Wedding. A Stark had to answer, and if none remained, a Snow would do. Winter fell, 3 nights later. The gates burst open before dawn. Flames tore through the east towers. Screams echoed in the snow. Ramsay ran through the hall shirtless, blood smeared across his chest, but this time not his enemies. They're here, a guard shouted. The North has risen. Roose stepped onto the battlements to see torches lighting the hills. Thousands, Manderley men, Serwyns, Glovers, Reeds, even Umbers, those who had survived, and at the front of them all, a boy Rickon Stark alive, dressed in furs, riding a black horse. A direwolf sigil sewn crudely across his chest, and beside him, Jon Snow, sword drawn, eyes full of fire. Rose's heart slowed. He had never believed in ghosts, until now. Ramsay charged toward the gate. He's just a boy, he screamed. I'll gut him myself. He pushed through the front lines before his men could stop him, but he wasn't ready for what met him. Jon. They clashed in the snow, wild, brutal, nothing like knights. Ramsay fought like a beast. Jon fought like a storm. You betrayed my brother. Jon roared. He was weak. Ramsay spat. Jon drove his sword through Ramsay's thigh, then his gut. The bastard fell to his knees, snarling. You'll never rule this land, Jon said. Ramsay smiled one last time. Then neither will you. John looked behind him. Rickon was still alive. The North had returned. That was enough. I don't need to, John whispered. I just need to take it back. He left Ramsay in the snow. The gates of Winterfell opened, and for the first time in years, a Stark walked through them. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a king in the making. Roose Bolton was captured by nightfall. He was dragged before Rickon. He knelt, not from honor, but from force. Rickon stared at him, eyes wide but unafraid. You took my home. My family. Roose's voice was steady. This is war. Rickon shook his head. No, this is justice. John gave Rickon the nod. The sword came down. The North watched and the North remembered.